Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Chewing the Crust with me, the Pie Eating Man. Today on Chewing the Crust, we're joined by someone whose story is a powerful reminder that healing isn't just possible, it can be creative, brave, and joyful. Leah Johnson grew up striving to be the best at everything, captain, president, overall achiever. She went on to become the youngest woman elected to her local city council. 25-year career in politics, but behind the polished exterior was someone struggling with pain, burnout, and the pressure to hold it all together. Then came a moment of truth. Leah chose to walk away, not because she was weak, but because she was ready to build something stronger. She went to rehab, forgave old wounds, embraced art and spirituality, and began the journey that would become finding fantastic joy. She's now an author, an artist, a retreat leader, a speaker, and someone who believes joy isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. This is a conversation about bravery, creativity, healing, and the power of giving yourself permission to quit. Now for the mildly embarrassing part, Leah, I'm afraid. You may like it.
I'm so excited.
Okay. I'm going to now do a little poem about Leah, as we always do at the beginning of the show, and then we'll get right into it. So, when the life weighs heavy and lights grow dim, when the noise of the world presses on skin, there's a voice that whispers, quiet but clear, you're allowed to stop, choosing to change gear. From pressure and pain, a new path is spun, where joy isn't chased, it's lived, it's begun. Welcome to Chewing the Crust, Leah Johnson.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
You're welcome. Your story and my story are not dissimilar. There's a little bit of, I don't know if you know anything about me, but maybe we will by the end, but there are some certain similarities. Although the beginning is very different, I think. And I generally, when I speak to people, I like to find out about you growing up. What was young Leah like and what was your youth like?
Yeah. I think that, to your point, though, there's so many similarities in the human experience, right? And seeking those connections, one normalizes those experiences and then empowers us all. So I think there's a lot of similarities in all of our stories. And that's why telling our stories is so important. So little Leah, wow. I was always ambitious. Even as a small child, I, was trying to achieve and do the next thing. And I think early on, it was how I learned that I could earn love. And so it became, a habit and a way of life to fill myself up, or at least feel like I was being filled up.
So do you mean, just sorry to interrupt, do you mean sort of love through reward?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. Like, and in the United States, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, action equals reward, and not just the value of love because you exist, but that things have to be earned, and even to the extent that being love. And so, yeah, it was how a lot of how I felt, I think, as a child, that there was a reward and I had to do an action to get the reward of that feeling of love and acceptance. But I never really felt like I fit in. Even as a small child, I felt like an outsider. I always felt like there was something more, like something I was missing. And, as I think back to it now, I really think it was my desire to connect deeply with the spiritual connection that I do have now, and have an outlet that was creative and have an outlet that could pour out my authentic self. And I didn't really have that space. And so, I think in that case, then I did the exact opposite, which was I did things to just conform and try and be like everyone else. And I found, a lot of success very early on in like leadership structures. And, I started working in politics in the United States when I was in high school even. And so like that gave me a structure where I could show up and use the talking points and feel like I was accomplishing something. And so, and then that just fueled this desire to seek that external validation over and over and over again. And so it really started to amplify through my teenage years. And then, I mean, as I launched into my career, that's where I went. And I sought all the external validations and success I possibly could.
Yeah, that's tough, isn't it? Because there was addiction in your life, which we'll come to. But do you think that was the primary addiction, the achievement, the goal setting?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it became what consumed me, to the point where, my rock bottom to get out of there was writing a press release to withdraw from my reelection campaign. I mean, that was what finally pulled me out, was quitting, like very publicly quitting. And
I want
was
to ask you about that. I definitely want to come back to that
yeah,
because I'm intrigued by that. I'm intrigued by that process. Before you got there, though, had you worked in local government as well? It's different. I don't know what the
yeah,
process is set up about that. And here we have local government workers. They would be probably working for the government for you guys. Like they operate the roads and highways and all of those kind of municipal things.
yeah.
And then we have councillors who ultimately those workers and their hierarchy are answerable to. And it feels like from your description, you might have done a bit of both of that.
So I never actually worked for the government. I
Right.
worked for politicians, and then I was a politician myself. But so I worked on the campaign and policy side, advocacy side of it. That was external from the roads but I was an elected official, one of those people who helped make the decisions for my
Yes.
community to about funding and policy and that sort of stuff that then those government employees carried out. So
Yes.
that was one of the many roles I had in politics, but I never worked for the government. I always worked on the political side of it. So,
Okay. So at what point in this process then did you start to wonder or perhaps feel that something was broken or wasn't right? There must have been was there a straw that broke the camel's back, or was it far more dripping tap than that?
I think it was actually a combination of both, right? So, I mean, I was in it for so long and I started so young. And, my early years, there was so much, I don't know, prestige. And I worked in national politics and I worked on presidential campaigns. And, when I was in college, and my uncle saw me on CNN one morning, like these sorts of things. And so there was this, like, I don't know, prestige about it, for lack of a better
I get that.
word, that like made me feel important and I was part of it. And, then I gradually moved into just doing local politics in the town that I grew up in. And I mean, there were lots of times in there where I'm looking at myself being like, is this really how I'm going to make a difference? Like, and why am I doing this? Like, what is the motivation that keeps me showing up? And I would return to that feeling of importance and that feeling of external validation and that, accomplishments and awards and winning elections. And
Mm.
to some extent, I mean, not to some extent, politics is like a drug, because you have the intense high of winning and the adrenaline that comes with that. And then you have the intense lows that come with losing. And both are very prevalent, sometimes in the same day, when you're doing the work so intently all the time. And so you work for that next high because it feels so good. But the inevitable failures came. And for me, when the inevitable failures came, I filled that void with alcohol. And so that's where that it really became an unhealthy dynamic, because I felt this constant need to succeed and the next thing and the next thing. And I mean, at some point, it was like I just wanted to be the most successful ever, whatever that even meant. And I thought the next success is what would make me happy, is what would make me finally feel better and loved, to the point where I found myself, after I was elected official and had my second child, and I had chronic PTSD, depression, postpartum depression, in these trauma and addiction cycles, and I tried to take my own life. And it was almost successful, and it was very scary at that moment, afterwards awakening and realizing what I did. But instead of saying, "I need to quit," what I did is I found myself sitting at a table with community leaders a couple weeks later talking about running for higher office because I thought, like, that was a thing. That would make me better. I will be happy finally if I get to the state house. Finally, if I do this. Finally, if I go back to Washington, D.C. Finally, I mean, it was like president of the moon. Like, there was nothing that was
Wow.
going to fill that void. And, you know, that was really kind of the pinnacle of the whole thing in that moment, or in that time frame, where then the highs and lows were really bad. And my lows were getting worse, and I was drinking more and more, and I was spiraling. And I finally, at some point, when my husband said, "Is this how you want to live? Do you," and my children were very small at this time, but, "Is this how you want your kids to see you? Is this how you want to raise your kids? This is not the kind of mother I know you wanna be." And I had to really seriously look at myself and start to redefine, what success looked like. And it stopped looking like all the things I had thought it was, and started looking like everything that I didn't even know how to begin to get to, but knew I needed to change.
It's incredible how much that description sounds like someone with a drug addiction. It really is. And I know you will know that, but those highs and lows, and the 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 desperation for the high, losing any concept of why, because that's what's gone, isn't it? The why. It's just the how. The why's gone, and you just, how do I get it? How do I get it? How do I get it? And how long between your husband having that conversation with you and you writing your letter of resignation? How long a period was that? How long did it take for that that penny to drop with you? And
Well, I think he had said it many times before.
okay,
But when you're in that active addiction space, like, you don't wanna hear it. And I I mean, you don't hear it until you and your heart and your soul and your spirit are ready to, right? So, from the time I heard it to the time I wrote that was only about 2 weeks. So, because it was basically the night he said it, and it, like, hit differently than it had ever hit before. And it was also this realization that, you know, I was clearly perpetuating cycles of generational trauma and addiction. And if I was successful at taking my own life, not only was I going to perpetuate those cycles, I was gonna make it worse. Like, my children's life, if I was successful at taking my own life, I mean, I
let's
can't
not go
even
there.
imagine what that would have been like, right? So
Right.
like, being in that space and confronting that and realizing I had to change. So actually, that night he said that to me, I called my dad and I said, "Take me to rehab tonight." So I went that night. And I checked in, and the next morning I woke up and I was like, holy shit, what did I just do? My
That's
life is
amazing.
over, because if anyone finds out I'm here, I'm an elected official, and it's ironic and interesting to me now because my life was over, just in the best possible way. And I couldn't see it then, and I can see it now. But
That's
so, yeah.
amazing. Do you think that conversation, did it hurt, or did it feel like a way out, or can you not really tell which one of those things it was?
I'm a firm believer that life isn't really one or the other of anything. So
Yeah.
I think it was deeply a combination of both, right? Like, having to confront in myself, like, I have a problem. I need help. I need to stop what I'm doing and totally change everything and take that personal accountability and responsibility that came with making that decision. Like, that was a lot. There was a lot of
Yeah.
guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of all the things, but also it was a relief. Like,
Yeah.
wait, I don't actually have to keep doing this anymore. And I think so often we stay in places that we're miserable, of comfort, even if we're miserable, because it's what we know, right? And the fear of, like, what would life look like if I stopped? But what I've come to realize is it created this beautiful opportunity of unfolding for me to lean into my soul and finally reach into and find that little girl who never felt like she fit in, and create a way for her to actually express herself and how she felt. And so,
And you make it work, because you've chosen. There's that. Choose life is one of the things they used to say. I think after Trainspotting, it was when Trainspotting the movie came out. Choose life, but you've chosen life, and what it clearly demonstrates to me, as someone who doesn't really know you, and doesn't only knows your story very briefly, it shows how deeply you adore your husband and what a wonderful guy he must be, and it shows how deeply he loved you, and that's very special. That's worth fighting for, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, real meaningful love that isn't earned. I mean, because quite frankly, I'd done everything you could possibly do to, like, push it away, right? Like,
It's
I had
true
done everything to
forgiveness.
not earn it.
Yeah,
And
I'm a big believer in forgiving oneself, forgiving the people around you, forgiving your old you, and moving forward, and all of those things. And what you can't rely, you can forgive yourself, and you have to act on that. If you've really forgiven yourself, you have to change, don't you? But what you can never do is rely upon somebody else's forgiveness. That is a true gift, and he's clearly offered that to you. And forgiveness is a strong phrase because it suggests you've done something terrible. It's not for me to judge, but he's giving you an out, isn't he? And that's magic.
yeah, so in my first book that I wrote, which tells this whole story in a lot of ways, what I did is I flipped, the political thing on its head, and I talked about building a self-advocacy campaign, because what I realized is I had spent a career and a life building advocacy campaigns for everything else and everyone else but myself. And when you talk about in campaign politics, like, one of the things you need is your own advocate. You create a kitchen cabinet, your people who sit at the kitchen table with you and show up for the campaigns, right? But
Uh,
I needed that for life. And we
uh,
all need that for life. And finding those people who, like, are your people and will love you and support you and be there no matter what. Like, I feel so grateful to have him as part of that, and other members of my family too, right? And so, very much my kids in some ways, even though they were little, but now they're very much part of that. But those people who and learning to set boundaries to know the difference, right? Like, these people aren't really helpful. These people are my people. And so it's an important part of it for sure.
And you need people that you can trust that will tell you when you're going wrong, don't you? You need people that you don't second guess when they tell you you're going wrong, and you have to reflect personally on that rather than reflect on them. Because I think a lot of people jump to, it's like road rage, isn't it? I think most people who act in anger are generally embarrassed of themselves. So if somebody says you need to pull yourself together because you're doing that, you react in anger, that's because you're probably wrong. So you need those people to do that, don't you? So that you can say, yeah, okay, I've effed up here, you know.
But you also have to trust yourself enough to be able to listen to that too, right? Like, that's part of the challenge is, at some point, no matter what the trauma that I had as a kid, or, like, I was sexually assaulted in college. So, like, I had like childhood trauma, and then that compounded. Like, no matter the trauma that I had, I was still making choices in my life to respond to that. And as an adult. And so at some point, we all have to find it within ourselves to confront those demons. Demons is a hard word. I call them cringe moments, like my cringe moments where I take them and I wrap them in love and grace instead of leaning into shame and guilt. Because at some point, we're all doing the best we can, but I still have to feel into those emotions and feel into those experiences to be able to move past it. Like, pretending it didn't happen doesn't help me move past it. And so it's, how do you find it in yourself to give yourself love and grace for those cringe moments and then move through it. And at some point, we're all just doing the best we can.
Yeah, I think you have to have you have to have the trust in yourself that there is a kind voice in there that will give yourself a break, don't you? You can catch yourself out with that kind voice and tell the person off who's made the mistake and trust them. I know it's very deep and it's a little bit woo-woo, but I think unless you've been through those moments, it is hard to sometimes demonstrate it to somebody who hasn't. But I do think most people do go through things, and we all, what is certain is that we all make mistakes. And I think anybody who says they don't, they're either work shy and they're not trying, or they're liars, because they're the best things to learn from, but provided you do learn from them rather than just say, okay, I made a mistake, on to the next mistake,
Yeah. I find now, if I recognize it's in the hard, that I heal the most. But you have to allow yourself to be in the hard. Like, you have to feel those experiences and giving yourself tools, like whatever it is. But I think that was part of what allowed me to finally get out. As I talk about, like, my life was on two parallel tracks. Like, there was the trauma track and addiction track that I was living. And then about 15 years ago, I went on my first spiritual journey, which, like, cracked me open just this much, just a little bit. But what it did is it created a parallel track that, I would slowly, and sometimes it would be I'd do something and then I wouldn't do it for a month or 2 months or 3 months. And then I'd do something again. But it allowed that little bit of self-love, little bit of grace, little bit of something different, a juxtaposition to the trauma track, that over time, as that built up, it's almost like they cross paths, right? And so the trauma track became the less dominant track in my life, and the spiritual, joyful, happier person became the dominant track. And it doesn't take away those things. The trauma track's still very much a part of who I am. It's just, it's not the dominant track anymore. And it's not what controls my life. And it's not what I listen to. I listen to, that wasn't great, but also you were doing the best you could given the moment. So I'm going to wrap you with love and grace instead of shame and guilt. So
It really is interesting to hear you. I when I was about 21 to 25, and again, this is in my book, but I basically was bullied by my boss at work, and I didn't know at the time, but I think I'd been struggling with depression since childhood. And the day that I put in my sick note to say I'm too broken to work, there was a lot of guilt on that day because I didn't know what I was going to do. I had a mortgage, I had a young family, and we went off to a nearby city. It was it was around about my birthday. It was a Friday. I know it was a Friday, and we went to like a food festival where they have all like the French sausages and garlic and figs and all those kind of things outside. And that day, when I think back to it, it was like someone had stopped holding my head just beneath the water. I'd just come up and was able to take a breath, even though I didn't know how long I would be able to take the breath for. I was able to gasp. And after about, I think, I don't know, two to 4 weeks, I can't remember how long I was off sick for, I put my notice in, and that was then the next big gasp. And then you're in control of your own destiny to some extent, aren't you? Because you've left. You know, what happens next is entirely down to you. No longer can, in your case, the addiction, in my case, the people, control that life because you've chosen, right, I'm changing this. This is, that has to change now. Even if you go back to the addiction, or even if you go back to the job where the people are, today, everything changed. And I have the choice to do what I want with that. And that was a very liberating thing for me, but it's very, very, very scary. I'm not a gambler, and I've never been a gambler. I'm not particularly competitive at all. Well, really. So it was a big weight on me to get it right. And I had a time period within which to do that. But I love the similarities between what you're saying and what I'm saying, even from different worlds. And I didn't go on a spiritual retreat, but it took me too long. It took me too long to realize how to put my life back together. I think I don't normally talk this much. I normally just
love it.
ask questions.
Thank you.
But when I was about 30, some things clicked into place and some reasons were explained. And about 6 years ago, so I'm 46 now. So about when I was 39-ish, I went on a it was like a leadership management course, but it was quite a good one. And there, that was my spiritual retreat because they took me to pieces. And I thought, I think I've said this before on the pod, but it was like a 3-day course. And for the first 2 days, I just thought, this is a load of shit. This is absolutely shit. None of this it's just all management twaddle. I'm not interested. It's not appealing to me. I'm not. And then day 3, I realized I'd been taken to pieces, laid out like an engine on the floor on somebody's carpet, like ready to put back together, and came back all clean. And my wife said, who's I've been with since I was 19, she said, "You've never been the same since that day. You've all, you just came back a better person." And that's when, for me, the push towards realizing I can help other people with their mental health. I can perhaps do things, stand up for, because I'm quite passionate about women's health and women's voice in just everything. I just don't think there's a difference between men and women as far as representation goes. I have a big problem with that, and a big problem with misogyny and all of that kind of stuff. So all of my things that I was frustrated about that I had perhaps had an opportunity to help people with. That's where it all started. The pod's only new, but all of that comes from that sort of slot there. And I'm not religious at all. But I always think about spiritual things of being like eye rolling. But that day changed. That event also taught me, don't eye roll. Listen. It might not be for you, but listen, because it could be. Everybody's got something new to learn every day. There's something special out there, and you just don't know. And I've encountered lots of things that I can't explain or that have just worked. And who cares whether it is spiritual or not? It just works, so I don't care.
Yeah, it's interesting how any person, like I started saying at the beginning, that like stories, even though we don't have the exact same story, like there's so many parallels in life, right? And so your analogy of like breaking you apart and putting the pieces back together, I say that often about that first spiritual journey. Like it just broke me apart, but it broke me open, and it took me a long time to figure out putting all the pieces back together again. But that's where now, to your point, like, because I figured it out, and I have these tools that I use and I have these experiences, like, to empower others to find their journey. And maybe it takes them a little less time. Like, maybe it's not 15 years. Maybe it's only 5, because for me, it was this zigzag crazy journey, and that's part of it too. But there are so many tools I gathered in my basket of my own medicine basket of healing over time that helped me finally get to this place of where I've healed. We're constantly healing, but I feel a lot more healed now than I did 15 years ago. And, I forgave people. I forgave my mom, and I've forgiven myself. And to get to that space is something that I hope I could help others too. And, part of my transition out of politics was really important because what I also realized is in this whole big crazy world that we're living in, I say this often. I worked in politics for 25 years. I know how the world is, but I can't change it living in it as it is. I can only change it living in it as I want it to be. And so that's how I show up, as I want it to be, in joy and contentment and healing and hope and all of those things. And I also realized that I couldn't help heal the collective trauma if I didn't heal my own first. And so like those pieces are also important to that journey of taking responsibility for healing my trauma and the generational trauma. I carried my mom's trauma and my grandma's trauma, and because I was perpetuating the same cycles they had lived through. And to stop that and to shift that energy, now I'm getting woo on you here, for me, it's just, I feel so incredibly grateful. It's such a gift. And then to be able to empower others to do that, like, wow, I feel lucky and grateful.
You also said about the parallel tracks, and that interests me because one of the things I've learned on I've been on a number of, as we all have, on these management and leadership courses or those kind of self-betterment stuff. And the ones that have resonated with me have all had an element of the structure to them which defines all of us as having, whilst we're all different, our journeys to a point will all be different. And this is, you were talking about how if you've done some things that have worked, it's nice to offer that to people because it might just shorten their journey to get where what worked for you. And I'm absolutely entirely on the same path as you in that front. And one of the things that I've sort of found that has worked for me is that within us all, we have like a belief structure, and some of those beliefs are like knee-jerk reactions. So if somebody in front of me is racist, or if somebody is misogynistic or starts to bully somebody, I can't control the fact that that is entirely wrong to me. So I will jump on it, or I will react. Whereas there are other parts of us that we're perhaps less. They're still our personality, and they're strong to us, but they're less. We're more flexible about. We're more tolerant of people doing certain things, or of ourselves. Or if somebody leaves, I don't know, you go to do the dishes, and a pot was left. You're not going to react to that not being cleaned in the same way as you would perhaps an old lady being pushed over. So, and your parallel tracks thing, what I think you can do is you can change that core, because whilst we all have good elements to that rigid core that is hard to change, we also all have bad traits in there as well. Well, maybe not bad, but they're often called like negative or shadow traits or whatever, and whilst they're harder to change, those core things, they can be changed over time if you work on them. And that's I think that's the equivalent for me as for what you were saying, and there is a point at which you can perhaps, even if those traits still exist in that sort of less adjustable core, you can be more aware of them and attend to them on a more regular basis, or have like approaches to managing those triggers if they arise, so that you don't, the worst side of you doesn't manifest, and actually you've taught yourself that actually that's acceptable, and I'm in the wrong with my opinion, and as you say, a lot of those feelings or those opinions are taught to us by grandparents, by parents, and because you were taught them as a child, you just accept them because that's how it is. So to train that out of yourself can be hard, but and you hopefully get to a point where the management of them is such that the better ones prevail, as hopefully was what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, and for me personally, my tool has really been creativity. And so even before I had the language, so when I was a teenager, I would journal and doodle and cut out magazines and write poetry and draw with oil pastels. And I mean, I have journals and journals and journals of me processing my trauma and processing my lack of worth and processing me not feeling like I was enough and processing my sexual assault and processing my relationship with my mom and all of those things. And so I had leaned into that as a tool for a long time. And it really is just as I've fully completed my transformation from politician to painter, it was in the last year and a half that I got trained as an intentional creativity cura and had the language to describe what it was I was doing all along to process my trauma or process any big things, right, that we're dealing with. And it's, it's a little woo and it's a little scientific too, right? Because it's neuroscience and it's shifting your energy. It's getting that out of you literally into creating something. And so, one of the little practices I always share with people is just this idea of prayer dots. That if you're in a space and you need to release some things, like, just do little dots of prayers and intentionally think that you're letting those things that you need to release out of you. Or if you're in a space where you're struggling, but you need to lean into gratitude and love, do the same thing. But it's little exercises like that I'd been doing forever that now I have the language to describe that allowed me to process that and lean into that and, we are, in my opinion, we're all creative, and that part of us is longing to come out. And when we let that out, it allows us to transition and change things in a way that you wouldn't otherwise do it. It's like it is active processing of things. And so for me, that's been my big tool. That's been my tool that's allowed me to lean into that constant transformation over and over again. And now I go to the canvas and I paint all the time. And every time I go, I'm releasing things and letting more go and receiving more things. And it creates this flow of energy that really has allowed for this massive transformation from politics to painting. So
there's so many things that you say that I just want to talk about more. But there was on one of those courses that I went on, there was a lady with us, and she was very dismissive. She was very practical. I thought I was practical, but she was super practical. And you got to book on these events in the morning. So there was like 6 slots in each one, and you got taken off to, it might have been a women's shelter, it could have been a solicitor's, it might have been an event centre. And we got there late, and the only one that was left that she could go to was an arts and crafts thing. And she was like, oh no, what the, and she went and she came back, and she has remained in touch with the people that she did it with, because she absolutely couldn't believe the benefits from that. And I'm moderately good at doodling. I'm not very good at drawing. But I am told all the time that I am creative, and I like that, because I don't, people assume that if you're artistic or you're creative, then that means you can draw well, and it doesn't. I make things with wood. I do a bit of blacksmithing. I paint models. I just like doing things like that, creating things, and that is my go-to if I'm struggling. Usually, do you find? Sorry to jump about, but do you find when you're struggling? Do you struggle with depression?
Yeah. Well, not as much as I used to. I feel
you
like
manage it.
I manage it much, much better, but I did. And probably from a very early age, like you said about yourself.
And when you are in, or when you feel the tentacles of depression, that's kind of how I sort of describe it. Because I've never been an addict, but I feel like depression is not dissimilar to having an addiction, in that you for me, it never goes away, but you have to manage it, and it becomes more and less under control depending on what's going on in my life and what my physiology is like and those kind of things. But do you find that when those tentacles are coming in, do you find it harder to go to those activities? Because I do.
Yeah. But I think that's when now I have this observer and this awareness and this curiosity about those things that enter my mind that I didn't have before. And so I know when I start to have, as you call them, the tentacles come in, that's when I need to lean into that even more, as with that idea of curiosity, like, what's going on? Why am I feeling like this? Why are these thoughts that I haven't thought in 2 years suddenly arriving and making me feel those old feelings of lack of worth or failure, all the things that I used to run in my head all the time, right? Like, but now I approach it with such a curiosity and observer, like, what's that about? Whereas before it was, I would get sucked into that, and then I would pull down into that cycle. And so, but I would say, like, even if you have like you talked about, like the brief moment of air, like even if you have a moment where you're like, whoa, this is clearly that space of my being talking to me, I should lean more into whatever it is. But creativity is a powerful tool. And like you said, creativity means so many things. And we put so many rules on everything the United States specifically. Like there's supposed to's, and there's how you're supposed to do it, and this is how it's supposed to be. And we don't allow ourselves to create just to create, because
Yeah.
We are innately creative beings. And sometimes we just need to create without a goal or without a purpose other than the fact that we are arriving at a space and allowing ourselves to be in our truest form.
But that goes back to your point about art. Me saying I'm not a very good drawer. Do I enjoy drawing? Well, it doesn't matter whether I'm a very good drawer or not. If you enjoy
Right.
it, just do it. And you don't
Yeah.
have to show it to anybody. You don't have to, it's not going on the outside of your house or anything like that. But if it's something that helps you, then just do it. And even down to coloring books, those kind of things, but I do struggle. I turn into like a moth or a fly. I can't land on anything. I have to stop there for a few seconds and I've gone. And in my book, what I did was because I'm like that. I, I I haven't really spoken to you about my book, but because I wrote it for people like me, because I don't think there's a book out there for people like me to try and help them with mental health issues or to understand what they feel like and how they can happen to just normal people. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to have had, landed in an avalanche and got dug out and all of those things. It could just be that you lead a normal life and there's a chemical imbalance and that's fine. But I wrote my book in lots of short chunks, so it's almost paragraph to paragraph, and it's in the content. It's all like that as well, because the thought of reading 3 or 4 or 5 pages when I'm in a mess, it's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas those paragraphs are achievable. Everything is a success to me. Or hopefully, if somebody just reads a paragraph, they hopefully have got something out of it, and they don't feel like that weight of having to trudge through a book if they're not ready for it. But that's how I feel about a lot of things. It's funny, I had this conversation with my friend last night because he struggles as well with his mental health, and we both paint and we both play board games on a regular basis. And he finds, like I do, you'll get all this stuff out and you think, I can't be bothered, and just don't actually do the thing, don't do the activity. And that's hard. And I don't know what the answer to that is other than what you said, which is lean into it. But I don't know if I can.
But even like you hit on it though, like it's the micro things, right? It's like, even if you're just reading a paragraph, even if you're just doodling little bitty stars or like lines. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't, we also think that it's like we have to like scale the entire mountain.
Yeah.
But like you can just take a step. Like,
yeah, and there's a lot between the step and the mountain as well, isn't there?
Right.
That's a sliding scale, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think so often it's like the end seems so overwhelming. Like, how do I get there? That we forget that, it's just the little bits. Like, I mean, how do I paint a painting? It's brush stroke by brush stroke, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, that's interestingly enough something that's kind of always been in my life, those like little bitty actions. But I think if you give yourself permission to do just little bitty actions, and also then tell yourself that's enough, because part of it too is like, I know when I was early in my spiritual journey or early on, I would like do, I would meditate regularly, and then I wouldn't for months, and then I'd feel guilty about not meditating. And I'm like, defeats the entire purpose of like having to practice, right? Like, if it becomes something that is of guilt, like do the little that you can do and honor yourself for that. Like, that's the big part of it too. So.
I think that's one of the difficulties of ADHD, because when you've got an ADHD brain, you do like 3 months of something like 100 miles an hour, and then, okay, I've done that, and I've gone, you go from being a painter and decorator, and you're going, right, I'm going to go and be a race car driver now. So, and you do that for 3 months.
I can feel you on that, very much so. Oh, that feeling.
The way I manage that, I've now got about 6 hobbies, but I just cycle them, so I come back to them.
There you go.
Yeah, it does work.
It's like when you put kids, like you give your kids just a few toys and then you put all the rest in the attic and you cycle out the toys. So it's like they're always getting new
Yeah.
toys, but they're not.
But really, all they want is the box anyway, and you've thrown that
Yeah,
away.
right.
So, one thing you've touched on, you've referred to, but you haven't actually mentioned, and I know about it, is your relationship with your mum. Are you happy to talk about that a little bit, about how that manifested?
My mom, when she was here in human form, our relationship was not great. Certainly I felt the pressure to just be perfect. And that was what would create that space of the maternal love that I longed for. And interestingly enough, though, the two things that my mom and I we did talk about and we did agree on was politics and art. So go with that. I don't know what that means, but um
It's just the bits in the end of the story and the beginning of the story are great. It's just the bit in the middle.
There's a whole book in there somewhere on that. I know. One of the things I tell a lot recently about my mom and I's relationship is, in my first book, I finally got to a place where I forgave her. I was not angry at her. After she died, I would sit out on my back porch and smoke cigarettes and look up at the stars and just say, I hate you, Mom. The relationship we had was so frustrating to me because I returned to the space over and over again, seeking that validation, seeking the love that a daughter looks from a mother and never receiving it. And I will say it's amazing. And now I'm going to get super woo on you here, but in her spirit form, I've been able to redefine that relationship in a very meaningful way. And through art. I mean, my mom was an artist too. And so it's a way that I can communicate with her and build a different relationship. But one thing I always talk about recently is that when she was on her deathbed, she told me that I was a disappointment. And at that point, I had a successful career in national politics, graduated from a prestigious university, like all the things. And so on paper, I looked so successful. And yet I was still a disappointment. And I held on to that story. And that was a story I told over and over again for many, many years. And about 2 years ago, something just shifted. And I realized I started exploring that relationship even with more curiosity. And what limiting beliefs was I telling myself about that story that didn't allow me to hear her side, right? And as I leaned into it more, I realized, well, she didn't have the tools or probably the time and space to say it in a way that was more loving and compassionate. I mean, I would probably be pretty disappointed in me too at that point. I was clearly perpetuating cycles of generational trauma and addiction that she had lived out and that her mom and my great grandma and all of them, and she wanted more for me. And of course she did. And so when I started redefining what that story was and what disappointment meant, I owning my part in it a bit, it shifted that narrative and created even a greater space of healing and connection. And it shows up in my art in really powerful ways is she's there in that energy. But I think that's the thing, that we tell ourselves these stories and create limiting beliefs around them. But should we choose to really lean into the power of healing, it's how do you go into those stories with a curiosity that allows you to understand not just your side, but the entire scope of it. And so, it's a really interesting conversation to talk about with my mom because in human form, she was not great. But now I understand so many different elements of that and so many different layers. And there's so much healing and love and acceptance that it's actually been a really defining point of my journey and a really important part of allowing me to heal and grow. So,
It's not my place to say this, and it's not my role on this podcast either to say this. So you can listen or not. I think your mum said that, and I believe this very strongly, and I don't even know her, because actually she was talking about herself. Because most cruel outpourings are actually aimed at the person who says them. And I think she was disappointed in herself, not in you, because I think she realized she'd let you down. I think. Now, do with that what you will. But I think most cruel and angry things or thoughtless things come from a place which is actually a mirror.
I mean, that's powerful. And, I think like I said, I think earlier, I don't often think anything is in life is black and white. Like there's so much both, right? And I think it's probably both, right? Like at some point when you're reflecting at the end of your life where you've come and how, decisions you've made, I think in general our relationship was probably a disappointment. It wasn't great. So
The relationship might
whichever
have been, but
way.
that doesn't make you it. But
Well, yeah,
yeah,
and so but I've not but my point in telling that story, my side of that story is that that phrase, that space, that story, that narrative that had, my mom said I was a disappointment on her deathbed. Like, I mean, I could control and run with that for the rest of my life and live out that story. But when you can approach it, and I appreciate your thoughts and your feeling into that story, because there's an energy to it in it that means something for me too. But I think that's the power of that dynamic, right? Like when you can understand that stories are dynamic, or experiences or trauma or anything is dynamic, and it can totally morph and change, and you can build a relationship with it that allows that flow instead of it being this defining thing.
I think you've done something I would very much struggle to do, and I admire you incredibly. And I think if you can look at, and it's not just that statement, if the relationship was as strained as you've described it to be, I think to be able to review the narrative and forgiveness on all parts, I think that's admirable, and I think it's incredibly good for you, because as you say, you could allow that to eat you up for the rest of your life, but you've eaten it up, which I think is impressive.
Well, thank you. But
Are you good at taking praise?
not really, no.
No, me neither.
Thanks. Okay, moving on.
That's the only thing that I've done. I've always said I'll talk about anything, but when people do that, I'm like, yeah, anyway, carry on. Let's jump from
Well,
here.
and having worked in, you spoke about, just different structures, like patriarchal structures of like people who will just endlessly talk. It's just, I've never been good about that. And I need to get better. You too, Mark. Like, we're going to get better about that. Like, because it's important. Like, because then you're
I'll tell you when I'm good at
embodying
it.
the
I'll tell you
things.
when I'm good at it. And I think you're the same if it's going to help somebody else. But I'm not very good at it. If somebody says, you've done a really good job with that, I'll just like, oh, thanks. You know, quickly moving on. It's really awkward. It's very British to not accept praise. Americans are normally like, yeah, thanks, man.
Well, I'll be an honorary Brit in that way.
Yeah,
Sure, I'll take that.
You join us. But yeah, we do need to work on that. I was thinking, I tell you what we do, I would like to do with you. I would like to read your book, although I'm a terribly slow reader. And I would like you to read my book. And I'd like to come back and talk because they sound very similar.
I would love that. Sounds like so much fun. Let's do that.
Yeah. Because I don't consider myself an author. I'm a guy that wrote a book. Yeah, this is the praise thing, perhaps a little bit, but my book was a very practical problem to solve, rather than a creative solution. So I felt forced to write the book because it didn't exist, and I needed it to help somebody else. Whereas you sound like you told a tale which is very similar, but I mean, you might say the same thing to me anyway, but I like what I'm hearing is really perhaps what I'm trying to say. But I was reluctant. I don't want to be an author. I'm not interested in it, but it did help me. It did so much for me. I don't know about you.
For sure. And you're an author, and you're accepting that praise, and I'm sure your book is amazing, and you're going to own that.
Yeah, well, it's all right. It's a good book. It is a good book. It is. I'll take that. It's a good book. But I don't know that. It's weird because I can talk about the book like it's another thing, because it is a good book. It's a really good book. I know it's a good book, but I don't feel like that was me. I just feel like that's the book, not me. I don't get it. So we've kind of hovered on stuff that is the difficulties and the obstacles. But I'm gonna read this. This is what I've written down. You chose the courageous quit, which I really like. Learning. One thing I have learned to do recently is try to reward myself with more no's. I was always, and I still do too much. I still say yes to too many people, and not to the point where I don't see things through, but I have too many things to do sometimes to my detriment. So the courageous quit, I really like that you did, and stepping out towards that new life. Now, this is what I've written. After leaving politics, Leah discovered art, creativity, and spirituality as powerful tools for recovery and transformation. You, because she's rude, she's the cat's mother, you describe this transition as rebirth. You quit what was breaking you, career, alcohol, and pretenses, and embraced painting, writing, and spiritual practice as your new path. I want to know, you then go and say, I've said, you began exploring divine, feminine, and indigenous healing traditions. So tell me, if you don't mind, sorry, I sounded a bit demanding then. Please tell me. Please tell me, how did that transition happen? So you've had the conversation with your husband, who said you need a life check. He didn't put it like that, but and you agreed, so you did. You've gone to rehab, and presumably that was predominantly for alcohol.
I mean, that's where I wrote the press release.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Yeah.
So what now? How do you go from that to? Were you a woo-woo person then?
Yeah, a little bit. So,
okay.
Well, the woo started.
Can I just say I'm not anti woo woo. I kind of get woo. I'm into woo woo. It's just in my head. I'm a scientist, but by profession, I've got a degree in science, so I don't really. It's not natural for me to say that I am a woo woo person, but I am a woo woo person, whether I like it or not. I am.
I like it. You just mentioned it early on, and so I've just been playing into the woo more. But
No, go for it.
yeah, no. So that's where I was like describing that tracks, right? So 15 years ago, I went on my first spiritual journey to Teotihuacan, Mexico, and
Yeah.
I mean, at
Can I
that
just
point,
say, I'm so glad you said that because I could not have said that.
yes. um, and at that point, I would have called myself an atheist. I didn't believe in anything. And in 1 week, it shifted everything. And I keep looking at the wall over here because my painting of Guadalupe from my dear friend Emily Greaves is hanging right there. And she's just like there, with me on this journey and has been since that moment. Right. And so, I mean, for me, it was at that moment I discovered that spirituality didn't look like I had been told it was. Like it wasn't
Okay.
beige, it was colorful. It wasn't masculine, it could be feminine too. And so when I started to understand that I got to define what my relationship with my higher power, with the universe looked like, that's when everything changed. And it's been this 15-year relationship that I've built. And it is a practice. But it's more than a practice these days. It's integrated in every aspect of my life. It's integrated just in how I show up. Um, but again, it's come from those little bits over time that have allowed me to shift my belief and my understanding of my own divinity, of how that impacts my life, and just that awareness. And it's been profound at times, for sure. And you kind of were talking about different things that show up that I don't feel like they're accidents anymore. I listen to The Alchemist like all the time, especially when I can't sleep. So I listen to it probably like, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 times a year. I mean, I listen to it all the time. And it's that idea that like the universe conspires when you put yourself out there for your goal, for your desire, for your life's purpose. And I really have felt that as I keep leaning into my purpose, what as a painter, as an artist, as a creative, as a person empowering healing in others, and I trust and I stop trying to control that what I am able to co-create with my divine is more powerful and more meaningful than any of the successes I've ever had in my entire life.
Okay, so that's an overview. What does it look like? What does your spiritual you've got your bags packed? Did you go on your own to Mexico?
Yeah. So it was so I found out about the first retreat 3 weeks before it happened, and I was like, I'm going. Let's go. Bought a ticket, went to Mexico City. I'd been there before, but I love Mexico City. It's my favorite city in the whole world. And yeah, no, I just, there was a calling. And what it looks like is when I said when I was young, I love that you start your podcast that way because it really like has me explore like even layers deeper sometimes. But that young girl who had more to say and didn't ever say it and just leaned into the talking points, I think that was what my calling always was. I was always connected to that energetic, that divine feminine, that space and way to express myself. But I was told that that wasn't the way to do it. And even when I was in politics, like I like kept my practice on the sly, right? Like I didn't really talk about it all that much. I did a little bit, but you know,
So
I didn't
you did this.
amplify it.
You were doing that before you were going to Mexico before you ended your career in politics.
Yeah. So
I
7 years.
I thought it came after. I thought it was like a knee-jerk reaction after.
No, so it was Mexico, lots of years of darkness. And I actually went a couple times in there. Like that's when I would say it was like a parallel track. Like to your analogy of putting your head up out of the water. Like for a while and so it like started to go like this, right? Like the line of my spiritual journey exponentially started to go up while the trauma started to go down. And I think basically at the point they crossed, that's when I quit politics. That's when I quit drinking. That's when I went to rehab because that narrative was becoming stronger and more powerful. And the trauma narrative was becoming less powerful.
So you were actually quite lucky in that you had something else to pin your colors to. There was not nothing.
Right.
You had been doing that. Isn't it strange that makes me happy? That younger you that was stuck there. I was worried you were just lost. I imagine you was just, well, what do I do now? I was worried about that person, and I'm so pleased that there was a light, even if it was very dim. There was still a light to be aiming for.
Yeah. And it was my creative calling. It was my creative spirit that was in me that wanted to come out and express myself. And again, I didn't have this language until very recently, probably in the last year, that, and in some ways, I think that was part of the depression, is that person had so much to say and so many things. And I was so filtered and so controlled and so programmed and so scripted for fear of, not being enough and not being successful enough and not fitting the boxes that would allow me to be successful in politics. So I was afraid to talk about that. But as I lean into that creative expression and that voice and that person who always wanted to come out, it's even better. But I think that was part of it too, is like, it was a masking of who she always was.
So, I love all of that. And I want to go. I would like you to explain a bit more about divine feminine, but before we do, what I kind of meant when I said what did it look like on the ground, I physically meant you're in Mexico City.
Okay.
You've got some luggage. What is it? Are you getting on a bus or going to the desert? Are you going to an equivalent of a church? What do you do there?
So now when I lead retreats, but it's similar. You take your little suitcase and you go to a lovely little village called San Sebastian Obispo outside of Teotihuacan, which is the ancient Toltec pyramids that are there. So they date back to about, zero. Like they
Okay.
were created about
Aztec style things.
So in fact, they came before the Aztec. So the Aztec came later, and actually named it Teotihuacan, which means city of the gods, because they didn't believe that man could have built it because it was just so amazing. They came about, I think, 500 to 700 years after. So they do get associated with it a lot. And they did pull a lot of the themes and and different gods that you see at Teotihuacan are also in part of the Aztec as well. But so you're on the ground, you enter this place that's just the most magically curated little retreat center. And for me at that time,
We
I
need
was like,
details. What does it look like? Is it tell
blues,
me.
bright
I want
blues and
to I want to
orange.
go there.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Bright blues and oranges and just the most vibrant colors you've ever seen. And like really perfectly manicured gardens and roses, red roses are everywhere. And the mother, Guadalupe, her image is there next to that of Quetzalcoatl, which is the feathered serpent god that you see in Teotihuacan. And the images and the stone carvings and the tile, the intricate, vibrant tile that's everywhere. Um, I mean, for me, it was the most inviting place of happiness and joy. And all at the same time, like the energy just felt like I had become calm and safe. And when I went to the Tilma of Guadalupe for the first time and started to understand again that spirituality could be feminine, it was like the first time I'd ever really received a maternal hug in my entire life. And so
Wow.
that space like just opened me up. And I remember laying down into this well and just weeping and like just letting, at that point I was 28 years old, I think, like 28 years of tears finally come out of me. And at some point I realized I wasn't just crying my tears, I was crying the tears of my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmother. Just that buildup of tension and trauma and anxiety and stoicism, just letting it all go and flooding it. And this is where divine feminine, flooding it back to the mother, allowing her to hold it so I could let it out of me and receive new things. So that's what started it.
That's magic. When you get to my book, you're gonna like the bit about my description of the Red Sea.
I look
We are very
forward.
similar. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you. I was going to talk about it, but I'm not going to because I'm just going to let you read it. I've talked about it before on here. So, so I'm an alien that's landed on this planet. I mean, it could be argued by many that I am actually an alien that's landed on this planet. But imagine that I'm an alien that's landed on this planet, and you were to describe to me the divine feminine and indigenous healing practices that you're talking about. Tell me about that, and tell me about who can enjoy that or who can partake in that.
Well, I mean, everyone, like there's a concept called Ome Teoto, which is the god of duality. And the idea of union the duality of life coming into union, right? So masculine and feminine being in union, light and dark being in union. And that creating the sweetness and the nectar of life, right? Like when it's in union, that's when life recreates, and that's when it's in balance. And so for me, it's not that it's one or the other, but I will say, because I think the masculine structures were so strong that my appeal to the feminine really helped resonate and heal what I needed to be healed. And so, but it's that balance of of that energy, right? It's the nurturing, it's fertile, it's life-giving, it's earth. I mean, it's the trees and it's the bees and it's the animals and it's all of that juiciness of what it is to exist on earth and within balance of what that means, right? So living within our natural environments within balance and with union. Um, and it's really tapping in for me that maternal love and that maternal compassion and the fact that it's not earned. And if we go back to the very beginning of the conversation, I was saying, that's what I believed, that love was earned and that I didn't have to earn that maternal love, that simply because I exist, it is there. And, as I said, that first time that I sat on that church pew in Juan Diego's hot church, and Juan Diego was the um, pre-Columbian Aztec man who Guadalupe appeared to, um, and then he built the temple in her honor, after a whole bunch of trials and tribulations. But it's that love that in the purest form I've ever experienced, and knowing that I can access that over and over and over again.
Your description of it makes me feel very warm. I feel like it's being bathed in a really comfortable temperature. I want to go now.
Let's do it.
I was very, very lucky I was very lucky as a child to go to Jerusalem. And I, as a 7-year-old or 8-year-old or whatever it was, I didn't know what I believed and what I didn't. I think I thought I believed in God, but that was probably because everybody did, or I was told there was a God at school and all those kind of things. But I'll tell you one thing. There's something going on there. And I don't believe in God or anything, but I do have a very, very strong connection with nature and wildlife and ecosystems and balance, which is kind of what you've touched on there. But I also think, and I think you've made reference to ancestral energies and energy is a big part of the things that you've talked about for sure. And I think that we humans have at least one sense that we haven't measured or you can't feel or touch. And I think that when humans become very emotional, positively or negatively, I think we can pick it up. And I think the more of us that there are, the more we can pick it up. And I think that's one of the reasons Jerusalem is so special, because I think there's a massive outpouring of emotion there. And I think you can pick that up. I burst into tears in one location for no reason at all. I just did. But I think that's why we like to gather in bars. I think that's why we want to go to pop concerts. I think that's why we want to do all of these things and come together as people, because I think we can feel that and pick it up. But I do think there's and probably from what you're saying, I do think we have some massively energy connection with nature in some way. The only thing I'm going to say about the Red Sea is, ironically, because I've talked about coming up for that breath, the most wonderful place for me to be, the most special place that I can go, the place that puts me closest to the descriptions you've just given is 25 meters under the sea in tropical waters, where I can see the fish and the animals and the coral, and your breath work down there has to work, otherwise it goes terribly wrong. But yeah, so and when you are there, is it very spiritual in the sense of meditation and those kind of things? Is there a lot? Is it yoga and things like that, or is it less that?
So it can be. When I lead retreats now, it's really, again, leaning into that creativity, right? So creative prompts as we travel through the pyramids. I have little like travel paints and watercolors. And so just activating that part of you as you're experiencing the energy, which it's renowned for the refined energy, that same kind of thing you talk about when you visited the Red Sea or Jerusalem. And um so it's but yeah, and then just spending time with yourself. And I would say part of like any of this work, all we're talking about, the big quit you said, like it's about giving yourself permission
Mm.
to go there.
Mm.
And for some reason, that first spiritual journey, I realized that when I gave myself permission to be with myself, while at first it was terrifying, it allowed me to build that relationship over these years that then had that self-love and had that compassion. But it was because I gave myself permission to be in safe spaces with myself and confront all of the things that had built up over all those years. And so, part of any journey is with yourself is giving yourself permission to set those boundaries and be with yourself and be in that space. So that's meditation. And then it allows you to connect to something outside of you, whatever that is, for you. And so yeah, it's very much all of those, but definitely activating creativity for sure. So
I, I think one of the things you've talked about, and I perhaps have done this conversation injustice to some extent, is normalizing this conversation. And I think what you're saying there, I think we need to give. I think we all need to be more tolerant. I think we're in a world of such division at the moment. I think toleration is the only way that we're ever going to get anywhere near fixing the mess that we're in globally and politically, more locally and not. But the even the phrase woo woo, it's judgmental,
right.
and it's destructive, and the phrase whoa and all of those things. But you sometimes do need words to describe these things, and I think you can do them in a fun way. I think you can do them in a judgmental way. But the injustice that I've perhaps given is, but there is a reason behind it. Talking about the woo woo as if it's something different to normal, because it isn't. It's just a different thing. And I just think there's a lack of decent words to describe these things because they're not tangible. They don't always have a face, and they mean something different to different people sometimes as well. But I like you have a passion for normalizing the conversation, and as long as those sort of stigmas exist, it does prevent access to certain parts of society because it's prejudged because of the words that you end up using.
Yeah, no, in my second book, I think I used the words, I want to make it mainstream mama instead of because like when we talk about the divine feminine and the great mother and all of this stuff, it does have those connotations, which makes it then different and which is why I didn't want to talk about it when I was in politics, right? Like
Yeah.
it was easier for me to pretend like I could go sit at a more traditional church because then I had that talking point and I could say that than saying, no, my church is really leaning into the divine feminine and and a lot of people say like nature is their church, but I don't think they go so far to say as like, you know, my my higher power is a goddess and her name is Guadalupe, and I think she's the last goddess of the Americas, and that's who I lean into. But I mean, there's goddesses everywhere, right? Like in all the cultures of all over the world, like everywhere, every culture, every indigenous culture um has a representation of the goddess in some ways or multiple ways, right? So it's not something that's mysterious or new. It's in fact quite old. In fact, the oldest. And it's just been buried. And so I really appreciate you saying that, all that to say, because for a long time I was afraid to own it because it wasn't mainstream. But it's, again, it was who I was and what was bursting to come out through my power of creativity. And the more I can normalize that, the better, because everybody's journey looks different. Everybody's spiritual connection is different. And so allowing a diversified and more tolerant space for all of it is, again, how we grow. I totally agree with that. So
I am on a campaign to try and eradicate the eye roll when people talk about anything like this. So currently my passion is menopause and women's issues. I have a terrible frustration and guilt, although it's not my guilt, that men are so intolerant of what is a horrendous scenario for women. And actually, my wife and I, when we were younger, we agreed to, if we ever had a hangover, we would look after each other rather than point fingers and say, you filthy animal, you went out and got drunk. And because we didn't take that to excess, either of us, it allowed it to be a fair relationship. 25 years on, I love my wife a million times more than I did then. And when she goes through that process, I want her not to be in discomfort or pain just the same. So the thought that something that's totally out of your control, I mean, when it's teenagers going through teenage emotions, we facilitate it. We help them. We make excuses for them. Well, they're teenagers. It's difficult, or when it's terrible twos, we do the same. We understand. We're tolerant. What's the difference between that and menopause for me? Nothing. So I want to learn about the menopause, and I want to see what things we can do, and not just the menopause, women's health issues all over, but the menopause is the big word. So I want to learn more so that I can change my diet rather than just having the same meals every night. If we can include things in the diet that are going to help my wife that we can both have, and my wife isn't made to feel an alien like we're talking about with the other stuff, then great. If my wife could go to the gym to do weights because weights help with menopause, but it might be my wife or my friend's wife is uncomfortable doing that. So, let's go together. Doesn't matter. I'll come. I'll be the other person. But all of those things. Who are we? Anybody of us to judge people for things that work for them or that are uncomfortable for them? We shouldn't be eye rolling to anybody. Just the fact that probably the wealth of the Catholic Church was such that one of the faiths won. It doesn't matter to me, and whether I believe in the things you're talking about or not. If I attended and it made me feel nice, that's great. That works for me. I don't care. Whether it's moon magic or whether it's the Coral Sea, which works for me, or whether it's visiting Mexico and experiencing this, or Jerusalem. If it provides me with some peace and some comfort, or a new narrative entirely, like it did for you, brilliant. I just don't understand why we have to judge everybody for things that we either don't understand, we're not prepared to understand, or we just don't like the sound of. Well, just don't, if you haven't got something nice to say, don't say it. Don't roll your eyes. Just say, oh, that's interesting. Thanks ever so much. Bye.
Yeah. Having worked in politics for so long, it's just, I think you've hit it. A lot of it is we shy away from things we don't understand, or also are fear those things in ourselves, right? Or we say, like when you said the thing about my mother saying, like when we say mean and terrible things, it's actually more a representation of what's inside of us, not of the other people. And I think that for women, this conversation has been very challenging, and so many things that are just very natural to our cycles, who we are, you know, being the maiden and then the matriarch, and all of that quite frankly beautiful cycle of life that narratives get put on top of, and then that's what we believe, right? And even to, like, I have a 12-year-old daughter who is very much in that space, and there's a narrative about how teenage girls act, right? But when we say that narrative, then they feed into that. They only feed into it because we create the narrative. Like, at their core, teenage girls are exploring and learning just like any other. But when you start to say that they're catty and they're mean and they're emotional and they're hormonal and all of that, then they feed that narrative. Like, we become what people tell us we are, right? Unless we disrupt that narrative. And it's the same for any phase of a woman's life. And we constantly are put in these boxes of what we're told we are at any phase of our life. And menopause is no different. As I'm entering that point of my life, the next phase, right? Like, but for me, it's so important because to redefine those boxes, like, that's not just because society or culture tells me that I'm going to have an experience doesn't mean that that's the experience I'm going to have. And it goes back to my thing about I live in the world as I want it to be, not as it actually is. Because if I keep living in those narratives that I'm told, I just go back to that teenage girl or that girl in my 20s who was longing for something different, but couldn't get out of that, right? Because I was living in the world as it was. But if I get to show up in the world as I want it to be and lean into my connection with the divine feminine and my own growth and my own experience as a woman and empower others to do the same, that's how we shift the narrative. It's not living in the same narrative that we've been told, but creating an entirely different one.
Yeah. I was raised by my mum and in a matriarchal family, which is probably influenced why I feel the way I do. But women are ace. I don't understand. I just don't understand. Women are powerful. They can do things that men can't do, and they are just as valuable in every single avenue of everything I've ever done. They usually bring something that men are incapable of bringing to the conversation, and it's usually positive. And I find it very upsetting that the toxic masculinity has had to take over to control the narrative, and it's not right for me. But it's kind of a bit of a subject change, but it is about that judgment. And I was having a conversation today with somebody who I think a great deal of about violence against women and girls in a domestic violence setting. And whilst that's an extreme example, the thing is, if you tolerate the small stuff, the big stuff happens. We all have to say, don't roll your eyes at that person for talking about this, because it's it's their thing and it's interesting. In the same way as don't tell a sexist joke, because actually that leads to the two sexist jokes coming together and someone being empowered to do something more, and it ends up in violence against women and girls. And that's not okay. It's really not okay. We need to be in a society that just doesn't tolerate the butt of a joke. Doesn't have to be someone. That's my sort of rule. That the thing that you're laughing at doesn't have to be a person. It can be a scenario, it can be a situation, but it doesn't have to be a person. And we don't need to take people to pieces in order to get joy from that. And I think this is all part of the same thing. We should be far more accepting, because you just don't know. It might work for you.
Well, and you don't know other people's journeys either, right? So
Hell yeah.
It's about being aware and being sensitive to other people's journeys. My last project that I worked on in politics was here locally in Colorado to help in my town create a 24/7 resource center and shelter for people experiencing homelessness. And I mean, everything we are talking about was embodied in that experience, right? Like, people project their fears. I mean, so many people who were opposed to it are so close to homelessness themselves, right? Like, it's we lean into our fears so much more than we lean into tolerance. And for me, it's always been like, to those who are given much, much is expected. And it's the reason I feel so strongly about telling my story. I mean, I was an elected official, a woman who was in all these positions, had all this success, and I was falling apart. And for me to not tell that story does a disservice to the story itself, because it tells women that you still have to pretend like everything's okay when it's not. And, and then for me, in that experience of working to help create that resource center and shelter, I mean, I suffer from chronic PTSD. I suffered from addiction. I suffer from things that people who are experiencing homelessness overwhelmingly have those experiences too. But by the grace of the divine, I was given a supportive resource, supportive family members and resources to allow me to get out of that. And so for me to not do something with that and speak up on behalf of others who don't have a voice, I just, it's so important, but it's so hard when we lean into our fears opposed to our compassion and our deep humanity. And somewhere that's gotten lost. And again, though, if I keep showing up and living in my humanity and living in those stories and narratives that I believe can help shift the world for the better, at some level, that's all I can do. And so that's how it changes the world.
I really like you. I like your energy. I see. I'm getting... and I would like to ask you, if I were to have met you 20 years ago, do you think we would have got on?
Yeah, because what I would say is, even though like this person has always been in there. I mean, there might have been shields and masks and all of it, but like I always showed up with that same narrative I just shared. Like, that's why I was in politics, because I wanted to care. Like, that was why I showed up over and over again and got my heart broken over and over again, because nothing changed. Because I led with my heart, and I believed that somehow, some way I could change things for the better. And so I always showed up that way. That narrative is not in any way new.
You
It's
see, I
just,
don't like to do politics on here, and I'm trying not to, but I do think there's a bit of a juxtaposition, and this is possibly why things are the way they are at the moment. But I would imagine in order to be a success in politics, you have to be quite cutthroat, and you have to be prepared to stand on people. And there's a side of politics which is absolutely not that. But in order to succeed in that side of politics, you have to do that. And that in itself is self-limiting, it would seem, because if you want to help other people and that's your goal, you can't shit on people on the way there, can you? And that's a difficult situation.
yeah. I always, that person that I just explained, that person who showed up and believed that to those who are given much, I tried and I showed up in that way, and I lost probably a lot more than I would have won because of that. But there were also times where I made compromises to my soul that still make me nauseous. I mean, I'm not honoring the experience if I don't own that. Um, but but again, at some point, we're all doing the best we can with the tools we have at that very moment. And it's the Maya Angelou quote: "When you know better, do better." And that's where I'm at, right? And that's where you keep going. And so, yeah, sometimes it does make me a little nauseous, and I have some healing and forgiveness to do for myself for that space. But I also know, like, I mean, I showed up in my community and in spaces and spoke publicly about things that I just shared, right? Like, I know that, like, so it's, yeah. And at some point, it's why I had to leave, because I just couldn't do it anymore. Like, my
It's
nervous
those
system.
parallels again, isn't it? That's a really hard tightrope to
Yeah.
walk. There's one subject here I really want to talk to you about, because I'm absolutely jealous of it, and it's something you should be very proud of. And then there's one question I must ask you at the end, and if we get to a point and I haven't asked you one more big question, you must remind me, because it's the most important question of the whole podcast. So the first thing I'd like to discuss with you, and the thing I don't really do jealousy, but maybe I'm not jealousy, but it's something I'd equally like to achieve. You did a TED Talk. How cool is that?
I did. It was cool.
Can you talk to me before you tell us about it? Can you tell me how that happens?
I co-created it. That's how all things in my life happen.
Brilliant.
So, it was my goal. Well, I mean, I wanted to do a TED Talk since I knew it was the thing, right? I mean, public speaking and oratory. I was captain of the debate team in high school. Like, it's been like a TED stage. But this year, having 100% transitioned, no more politics. I'm done. I'm an artist. I'm an author. Like, the story felt the most complete it had ever been. And it was time to tell that story. So I made it a goal, and I applied to 40, 50, I don't know, a lot of them, because that's how you co-create, is you put yourself out there over and over and over and over again, and you get rejected.
Well, you keep applying to TED Talks. You apply to, like, are they at universities? Is that how it works?
They're everywhere. So there's universities, there's towns, there's tons in the UK. And so I applied. And
were you applying with different subject areas, or was it always the same package?
Generally the same subject area, but would modify it to, because some of them have different themes and stuff. But
okay.
I mean, obviously there's a wealth of things for me to pick from to talk about. So
yeah.
I did it, and it was right here in my own backyard in Colorado, which was awesome. And the organizers of TEDx Manitou Springs were amazing, and it should be coming out here really soon because I did it
I know,
like
I've been really frustrated because it keeps saying that it might take a few weeks. And I've been desperate to be able to see it before we did this, but it
yeah.
hasn't. So,
Me too. I'm desperate to see it too. So,
am I allowed to call you my friend? Can I say to people, "This is
please,
my friend on a TED Talk"?
yes, we are totally
Yeah.
friends forever and ever now, Mark.
Excellent.
So,
Right, so I can say, "Oh, look, I've got a friend," because I do like the accolade of saying I've got a friend who did this. That is good.
hey, please. Yeah, I
I've
mean,
got
you
a
don't
friend who
even
wrote
have
a book.
the accolade behind it. We can just be friends. How about that?
Defo. So, what was it about?
This. So I told my story, of ending up face down in a pillow in a rehab facility, and then the micro quits in life, right? Like the small little acts that lead to big transformation. I mean, it's the same story. It's you can do it. Life is hard. The hard is inevitable. The healing is your choice. And it's not easy, and it's a journey, and it takes fortitude and strength and courage and bravery, but you can do it, and you can do it little bit by little bit.
How many times did you practice it in the mirror?
700. I don't know. Right. A lot.
A lot.
It felt like 700. So.
And were you happy when you came off the stage? Were you buzzing?
It was one of the coolest things I've ever done.
Yeah.
But here's the cool thing about my journey now. Like that high I talked about, like in politics.
Yeah.
There's something different about the successes now because one, I'm enjoying the process, all the things that it takes to get there. But two, I've learned to savor it. And like I sat there that day and like some other people were talking about like, oh, how do we get our TED Talks out in the world bigger? And all this and I literally even said out loud, I was like, I'm just going to sit here and enjoy this moment. And I've learned to do that and like savor it.
Mm.
And so it felt like a different adrenaline rush than I'd ever had. That's not true. Like when I published my book too, it was like doing things because it felt authentic, not because I was supposed to. And the words I said were deeply me.
Yeah, because even when you write a book, if an editor get hold of it, they do alter it. Even though at the end it still feels like it's your word. What you did is your words.
Yeah.
That's nice. Has your husband been to Mexico with you?
Yeah, lots. We lived there for 3 months at the beginning of this year. So
I've always wanted to live abroad a little bit, even if it's like working.
It was super rad. It was the best. Oh, so good.
So the kids went with you as well?
Yeah, my kids are in a dual immersion school here, so they speak Spanish. My 12-year-old's like fully bilingual at this point. So
Muy bien.
Yeah. Not me. She'll tell you how bad my Spanish is. It's great. And then I'm like, well, I'm trying to learn. How am I supposed to learn? And she's like, Mom, your accent, it's terrible.
Well, I should do a big hello to all of my South American and Spanish friends because I used to work at a language school and I adore the Spanish language. So, yeah, that is cool. I speak a little bit of Arabic, which is nice, but for when we go to Egypt. But I just think it matters.
It does.
I think, when you go there, and it's not just it makes a difference. It matters. It's the right thing to do. Soulfully, it's the correct thing to do.
Well, my Spanish is still not great.
So the last question that I must ask you is, what is your favorite pie?
Oh,
And I know already it's going to be a sweet one.
Oh, totally. Like you British, you have all these other kinds of pies. I don't even think of not sweet pies. Pie makes me think of my grandmother because she made the best pies, like pumpkin pie, cherry pie, rhubarb pie.
Oh, rhubarb pie, yeah.
So how do I pick? I don't even know, but I think pumpkin pie. I have like this
So that's this
distinct,
time of year as well, isn't it? This sort of
yeah,
like Thanksgiving stuff.
yeah. But I have this distinct memory of making a pumpkin pie with my grandmother, and like she would, make the crust from scratch, and like her hands that were, aging, and just the way the dough moved in her hands. It's like I still like as I do, I feel that connection to her in this like really amazing, like almost morsel kind of way.
My grandma, both of my grandmas were very special, but my little grandma used to make the best meat and potato pie in the world. And I think my granddad actually carved this. There used to be, it used to have a tail, and it used to have some babies as well. But I don't know where they went. But yeah, I keep things in my office because of both of my grandmas and my granddad's. The dust came off that, but a lot of people I think don't struggle with that. But that keeps me in touch with them. I love it. I can like speak to them because there's things like that all around my office where. But yeah, my grandma's meat and potato pie. You Americans have it all wrong. Savory pies are just the way forward. I mean, obviously, sweet pies are good.
Right. You're right.
Crumbles are better. But and you know that a pie really isn't a pie if it doesn't have a lid. Therefore, most pumpkin pies are not actually a pie.
Oh, you're just like dismantling my pie experience. I mean, I guess I'll go with cherry pie then. Like, there's at
I've
least
got two books downstairs that are pies only.
The lattice crust on top, which my grandmother also made. So.
You can have that. Yeah. But I think I would have asked her to make the rhubarb one for me.
Oh, that was so good too.
Rhubarbs. Yeah, great. Right. Well, I'd like to say thank you so much for speaking to us. I would like to make an agreement with you. And if we set a date for the book to be read by, I might actually read it because I'm terrible. But if I have an obligation to you, I will do it. And then we could set a date to talk about it.
Let's do it. I'm in. I love it.
And then that's that. Have you enjoyed yourself?
This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just love meeting new people, and I think that we all have interesting stories, but I just find it so interesting how different people manage different things, and you walk by people in the street and you just don't know, as we were saying earlier, what's gone on in their life, and it's not for us to judge, but we should listen.
Absolutely. I've always agreed with that.
Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you so much. I'll be in touch. We'll sort something out. Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
Please thank your family for lending me you, if that makes sense. And yeah, we'll be in touch soon, and we'll do a monster book review. I'm gonna have to put a helmet on. I'm quite frightened.
This is gonna be great. I love it. So more to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us, Leah. Leah's story is a powerful reminder that healing isn't about perfection. It's about permission. Permission to stop, to rest, to think, to gather oneself, and to create, to choose a life that feels true. If Leah's story has inspired you, you can find more about her work at findingfantasticjoy.com. And watch out for the TEDx talk when it's released. I will put it all over the socials. We'll share it left, right, and centre, because then I can say I've got a friend who's done a TEDx talk, as you know. Leah, thank you very much for your courage, your honesty, your light. It's been a total pleasure. And I've thoroughly enjoyed getting another new friend across the pond. So thanks ever so much for joining us this week. It's been a real pleasure, a really interesting one. I could have talked all night with Leah. Just a great joy. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really, really, really makes a difference. And it helps more people find these stories. And if you'd like a bit of real talk and warmth in your life, sit by the fire, a Christmas gift for somebody. Grab a copy of my book, The Pie-Eating Man's Guide to a Healthy Mind, a down-to-earth guide to navigating the messiness of being a human being. Links are in the description to my book and to Leah's. If you've bought the book, please go on to Amazon and leave feedback. Thanks ever so much for joining me. As always, look after yourself and each other, and we'll see you next time.